So as far as that goes, all right, now we are getting a little bit, okay, interesting. All right, so y'all are a little bit ahead, and that's fine, okay? If that's what the questions are, stay hydrated, kids. If those are our questions, that's what I'm going to get to first. Now, of course, what I was prepared to talk about, of course, I'm prepared to talk about anything. So y'all just ask. So as far as that goes, looks like the people that are here have actually gone from, you've already been through the American Revolution. So you're really more concerned about the Articles of Confederation. All right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and start answering Zoe's question. You were asking about the Northwest Ordinance, federalism, and the Great Compromise. Okay. So first of all, let's go to the Articles of Confederation. And we have to remember that the Articles of Confederation, it is about pluribus, not unum, okay? So we've got this national motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one. Now, the Articles of Confederation, that emphasized the many, okay? So the role of the many rather than the one. So the sovereignty, okay? Now, sovereignty, that's a big vocabulary word there that'll help you in a variety of classes and contexts, that sovereignty is essentially where a government has independent authority. So no other government can tell that government what to do. And in unitary states, okay, where they have unitary governments, it means that there's only one level of government at the top. So for example, if you go to France, then the governments, the local, France doesn't have states, all right? So you've got the national government, and then you've got regional governments which answer to the national government. Now, in our country, neither the federal government nor the state governments are fully sovereign, that the states have certain rights and duties and responsibilities that the federal government can't force the states to act on, and then the federal government has things that the states can't force it to act on. So they share sovereignty. Now, the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Now, you want to remember that because the Treaty of Paris, 1763, ended the French and Indian War. Treaty of Paris, 1783, ends the American Revolutionary War. And that treaty, basically, it said with the United States, vis-a-vis or via-vis or whatever that means, but the United States being, and it listed all 13 states. Okay, so the Articles of Confederation starts off saying that this is basically a confederation of free, sovereign, and independent states. So all of the sovereignty is staying with the states at this time. Now, that includes land claims. So the British ceded the land, basically the British after the American Revolution. Let me go ahead and pull up the Treaty of Paris. Okay, and see what we've got here. I've got a little video on this, but let me go ahead and just make a little, this is a good graphic here. So let me put that over here. And I've got a little two-screen setup. So when you see me looking up, I'm looking at the other screen there. All right, so when we look here, we see that we've got the original states. All right, and let's go ahead and take a look at the original file there. And the British ceded all of this land out here. Now, the states basically claim stuff all the way to the Mississippi. So what we see here is Virginia had this western land. Virginia claimed all of this land along this border with North Carolina and south of the Ohio River. Now, in 1792, that was admitted as Kentucky. In 1790, North Carolina ceded this to the federal government and said, okay, we're going to, at the Appalachian Mountains, we're going to cede our western land claims. And that later becomes Tennessee. Now, this took a while. Georgia didn't cede this until 1802, kept that land. And then we see here that in 1795, the United States and Spain finally got, dealt with that territorial dispute. Now here, what we see here is that there were states like Massachusetts and Connecticut claimed these lands here. So there were different areas out here that were, that the states claimed. And so what they decided to do in the Northwest, now remember, this is something what you want to remember here is that today we call this area the Midwest. And when you think about a map of the United States, what's so Western about that? There's nothing Western about the Midwest. Y'all can quote me on that. But this used to be the Northwest. Now, today, when we talk about the Northwest, we're talking about the Pacific Northwest. But since this spent so long, this area was for so long the western frontier of the United States, even today, we call it the Midwest as kind of a throwback to the days when it was the Northwest. And of course, the Midwest kind of comes out here, into what was then belonged to the Spanish. So that is the Northwest Ordinance. Essentially, the states ceded their land claims in this area that's north of the Ohio River Valley, north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi, and they decide to make that a federal territory. So the Continental or the Congress will control this, and eventually this is to be divided into states. Now you can see these townships that were created here as well, and so they created a system where the West could be settled in an orderly fashion. Okay, so that's the main thing there, that the West is going to be settled in an orderly way, and the goal is to create new states, that new states will be admitted from this area. So now the other thing about the Northwest Ordinance is that it was specifically stipulated that slavery would not spread to this area, that slavery would not be legal in this territory, which sets a precedent that's going to come along later. Can the federal government regulate slavery in the territories, and to what extent? And in this case, the Congress is saying that there will be no slavery in this territory. Now, this is part of the really kind of aligns with the North. And remember that after the American Revolution, okay, so if we go and we look, let me run here and grab something real quick just to kind of show you what's going on, just to give you a little bit of additional perspective here that I think will be helpful to you. Let's see, now that's the American Revolution and Legacies of the American Revolution. I should go ahead and make a video out of that. All right, so looking at this here, the legacies of the American Revolution, which would be something that we could very well talk about here. But now what happened is by 1800, nearly all states, okay, it's not projecting onto that screen. Okay, so we're going to hide that. All right, so as far as this goes, let me make this as big as I can. It's not wanting to full screen on my second screen here. So by 1800, nearly all states north of the Mason-Dixon line. Now remember the Mason-Dixon line, and it's easy to remember because it's a straight line. It was a boundary. It's the boundary between Pennsylvania and Maryland that was surveyed by a couple guys, Mason and Dixon. And so all of these states by 1800, nearly all, because New Jersey took a little bit longer, but these states passed gradual emancipation laws. And so few, now note at the same time, few northern states allowed free black residents to vote, and some even banned free black settlement. Now remember that even though slavery was legal in every colony at the time of the American Revolution, it was not really a major part of the society. So you can see here that New York and New Jersey, with 7.6 and 7.7% black population, Rhode Island is kind of close there. But other than those three, we see that the African American population was never greater than 3% in any of these states. Okay, so never greater than 8%, but not greater than 3% in most of them. So you see that slavery in the North was not really a vital part of the economy at that time. But meanwhile, slavery became even more entrenched in the South, and that is the understanding that you want to take from that. So why is it that they're allowing this to happen? Now, I've heard someone argue before that really not allowing slavery here kind of, it gave an advantage to Virginia because they can't go out west and create, a slave system there to compete with Virginia cash crop agriculture. So as far as that goes, now the other part of that is there was a common belief at the time that slavery was on its way out. All right, that slavery is, the North is gradually getting rid of it, and next the South's going to come along and do that as well. So it was kind of a progressive sort of outlook that, we're going to go ahead and not have slavery here. And conventional wisdom said that slavery is eventually going to be on its way out throughout the United States. Now, as far as that goes, moving on to federalism. Okay, so federalism is essentially two levels of government. All right, so it's when you have, instead of having a unitary state, you have governments, share sovereignty. Okay, so that is something that's very important, that these governments share a degree of sovereignty. So sovereignty, like I said, that's where ultimate power resides. And in the Articles of Confederation, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. Every power, jurisdiction, yada, yada, that is not expressly delegated. So what we see here, that's two levels of government. So the federal government, in our government even today, does not hold all of the power. Some of that is held by states. Now, today, the federal government, I would say, holds most of the meaningful power, but under the Articles of Confederation, the state governments delegated foreign relations to the federal government. Now, let's think about this. Our Constitution is even written to talk about delegated powers. All right, so the powers that are delegated. Now, if my principal delegates something to me, my principal can do that, because delegating is passing something on to a subordinate. Now, I cannot delegate to my principal. So that cannot happen because my principal is not my subordinate. So really, the federal government was conceived as something to serve the states. The states didn't really see a problem, and that's something that's important to note, that as a result of the American Revolution, what people in the states really feared most is, we don't want to be dominated by an outside government, because what had happened with before the American Revolution is Parliament had passed taxes without consent and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And so they're thinking, we want a weak central government and strong state governments, because we don't want to be ruled over by someone outside of our boundaries. And so essentially, I encourage people to think about the Articles of Confederation as really kind of a glorified military alliance. And if you think about in a military alliance, what powers would the central government have? And so, they have powers over they can organize the Army and Navy, they can declare war, make a peace treaty, send and receive ambassadors. And so that's what you're looking at with the Articles of Confederation, that it is a form of federalism that has strong state governments and a very minimal federal government. But it's still federalism, because the federal government does have some responsibilities that are delegated to it by the states. And with that, we see here, and the Great Compromise. Okay, so y'all want to, this has been very interesting here. Y'all pretty much wanted to go on another topic, which is fine, because y'all are the ones who are here, and those are getting upvotes. So nobody's asked me anything about the American Revolution. So let's just go ahead and go on with it. Now, so the Articles of Confederation were seen as weak for a variety of reasons. One of those being that, the government didn't have the power to tax or anything like that. So, as far as that goes, let's see, that's the Great Compromise. Okay, so as far as that, let me go ahead actually, and I'm going to be done answering that. And so what were the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation? Okay, so Katie, remember that the Articles of Confederation had some strengths, because we won the war with the Articles of Confederation, but there were a number of weaknesses. So as far as that, first of all, that you had equal representation of all the states. So no matter how small or how large the state, it got the same say. So Rhode Island has just as much say as Virginia, even though Virginia is 10 times as big as as Rhode Island. And so to legislate, you needed 9 out of 13 states to pass any legislation, and to amend the articles, it took 13 out of 13. It had to be unanimous. And so from there, you see that there was no court system, there was no federal court system, there was no president. Now, remember, this was intentionally designed like this. It was designed like that to be weak. And so the articles, you've got, we won the war, and then the Northwest Ordinance, which we were just talking about. This was something that is seen as a great success of the articles. And remember that the Northwest Ordinance banned slavery in the Northwest Territories. But really, our problems are with a bad economy. And as a result of a bad economy, you had Shays Rebellion, which lasted for, around nearly 6 months in Massachusetts, because there was a shortage of money. All right. There's a shortage of currency, and so the debtor classes are asking for more currency. The creditors don't see a problem, and so you have this armed rebellion. And so going from there, those are really the main weaknesses. And since y'all seem to want to talk, let's see, what is TVs, whatever? What are y'all doing here? All right, so we've got that one. We're done with that. All right, so we actually have something that is on topic. Let me actually do a poll here. Let's see, what are you studying right now in your class? Okay, so American Revolution. Okay, so, and then we'll put something else. Okay, so let me go ahead and add that poll, and let me see what happens here. Y'all go ahead and answer the poll there, so I'm going to be able to see. Okay, so American Revolution. Okay, so, okay, it seems like now, ladies and gentlemen, remember, okay, now what I'm seeing here, this is the silent majority. Nixon talked about the silent majority. Essentially, during the Vietnam War, you had all these hippies that were protesting the war, and Nixon said, you know what, there's a silent majority out there that actually thinks more like, thinks more conservatively. And so what I'm seeing here is that most of you are actually still studying the American Revolution, but the questions seem to be focused on the Constitution. So y'all want to make sure that if you have questions, that you make yourself known here. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the Constitutional Convention and then get to the topic. Okay, so so y'all go ahead, y'all get some questions in here, because from what it looks like here, you're letting only about 15% of the people in here dominate the discussion. Okay, now, so as far as that goes, yeah, that's what y'all came here to do. So now, mea culpa, I could have done the poll a little bit early, and I think I will do that in future sessions. But y'all remember that as far as that goes, we're going to look at stuff leading up to the revolution. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to actually we're going to Kennedy. I'm going to get to that another time, because this is kind of way ahead of where people seem to be right now. So as far as that goes, now, Madeline, I don't know if I'd talk about this as most significant events or whatever, because, what determines significant? Now, as far as that goes, though, I would say that the ones that are most likely to show up on a test, I would say that the Stamp Act is really a non-negotiable. That's something that is going to be, even though there were several taxes passed by Parliament during this time, that the Stamp Act is the one that really sticks out. The next one I would say is the Intolable Acts. These were 1774. So the Stamp Act and the Intolable Acts, I would say, are two of the most significant events. But then again, there are also a lot of other significant events. Now, what I would like to draw attention to for this is causation. Now, even if we're looking at the road to the American Revolution or the road to the Civil War, we're looking at causation as something that is very important. Now, what is causation? Causation is the whole one thing led to another. And that's something I was actually talking to one of my tutoring clients. I do one-on-one online tutoring. If anybody's interested in that, there's a form on my website. It's expensive, but if you want to do that sort of thing, I charge the same thing for individuals and groups. But I was talking to my client, and my client wanted to discuss Pontiac's Rebellion. And I said, Pontiac's Rebellion is not one of those things where you have to know a lot of details about it. What's important is that you understand that Pontiac's Rebellion was, was a causal factor in the proclamation of 1763. Now, strictly speaking, it's really kind of going on at the same time. It's like which came first, the chicken and the egg. But when the British won the French and Indian War, they knew that most of those Western Indian tribes weren't going to be that happy, because the British colonists had a reputation for just, pushing west and pushing Indians off their land. And so, the British government knew that they were going to have to do something to placate the Indians. So they were already thinking about the Royal Proclamation of 1763. It's just that they didn't go through with it until Pontiac's Rebellion happened. So it's something that was kind of going on at the same time. But we need to remember the whole, this happened and this caused that to happen. That's really, to me, I think the main skill of the American Revolution is looking at those causes. So as far as that goes, without further ado, let me go in here and go over the road to revolution. Now, in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. If you look today, there are a lot of Americans who are very, very upset, okay? They're very, very upset. Now, Jay's theory, Jordan, or Jay's treaty? And also, Luke, if you can ask that question as a question, it makes it a lot easier there. So, as far as that goes, as far as it goes, a lot of people don't like our government right now. And there's always that case. But unless people are completely miserable, then typically they're going to choose a path of least resistance. They're not going to choose to try to overthrow that government if they can get by with, they're getting by. Okay. So right now, a lot of people don't like President Trump, but the economy's good. And when the economy's good, people don't rebel, no matter what their opinion of government leaders. They just generally are not going to rebel when the economy's good and they feel prosperity. And so he says here, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. So they have a right and a duty if there's a long train of abuses and usurpations. Now, there were no choo-choo trains back there, choo-choo, but you think about a king's robe. A king's robe has a long train behind it. And so, Thomas Jefferson's creating this imagery, which I think may be Locke's imagery as well, but this long train of abuses and usurpations. So it all goes back to the French and Indian War. All right, that's where this starts. Remember, that is the end of the policy of salutary neglect. Wars cost money and all of this debt. And so no more salutary neglect. So this is really kind of the first step here, is that the British had let the colonies do whatever they wanted, and now they're stepping in here. So the proclamation line of 1763 is the first thing that outraged some of these colonists, because if you put yourself in the position of a British colonist at that time, they think, well, we won the war, so now we don't have the French in the way and we can go west. And the British are like, wrong. And so they send, they say, no, you're not going to go. And then also quartering troops. Okay, so these are some of the things that are going on right at first, that the British decide that, the colonists really kind of botched the whole French and Indian War. The British had to come in and fight it themselves, basically. And so the quartering of troops is something that is another big point of contention. So Parliament said, we're going to keep these troops there for the defense of the colonies, but it's like, defense from what? They're gone. The French are gone. So Parliament. Now remember that Parliament is the British, the English representative body at this time. Well, technically British, right? So you got the British Parliament. And so the Parliament passes taxes. So we're at the end of salutary neglect, and the British government is trying to raise revenue. So there are three taxes. This is pretty convenient because we tend to learn things in threes. And so 1764, you've got the Sugar Act, 1765, the Stamp Act, 1767, the Townshend Acts. Now, do you need to know each of these years to take the AP US History exam? No, you do not. Now, what you do need to know is 1763, okay? You need to know that this whole thing started in 1763. So this is going from 1763 to 1776. And so then you've got the Boston Massacre is in 1770, okay? So what I do with this in order to remember, I think in terms of, okay, 1763 to 1776, this whole thing. And 1770s, the Boston Massacre, is kind of the halfway point. So basically the 1760s is when Parliament taxes the colonies. And I've got all this stuff on a lecture on YouTube, but the taxes are in the 1760s, between 1763 and 1770. That is fine. So when it comes to remembering dates, now remember, there are years that are important. What was the important year I just mentioned? Come on, y'all chat it up. Y'all chat it up. Did I hear a 1763? I know y'all are all typing right now. You're just looking for the numbers, right? Okay, 1763. Awesome. Nice job. Nice job, Luke and Madeline and Zoe. So, yes, 1763. All right, Corey and Jordan. So, let's remember 1763 is an important year. And if you can remember 1763, into the French and Indian War, then 1770, the Boston Massacre, then you can separate the taxation and the protests from like the more violent conflicts that come later. Now, molasses, this is something that is not common today, not a common sweetener, but molasses, this was, you know, really the common form of kind of liquidy sugar back then. So the Sugar Act was an import tax on foreign sugar. And I don't know why I've got it all the way up there, but an import tax or tariff. Okay. Now remember that when we talk about import taxes, we could call them tariffs, or duties is the other way that we can refer to those. Kind of like when you are at the airport, some of you might have seen before a duty-free store, and the duty-free store means that it is, you know, you're not paying any taxes on there. Now, some of the goods may be expensive in and of themselves, but Parliament starts with an import tax, and that's what makes the Stamp Act so offensive to the colonists. Now, the Sugar Act does not provoke nearly the amount of animosity from the colonists as the Stamp Act does, okay? But they didn't like that there were these admiralty courts, okay? Now, these admiralty courts, like if somebody was caught smuggling, then they are going to go before the admiralty court, and they could end up losing their ship without a jury trial. So this did make some people upset, but nothing like the Stamp Act, okay? So the Sugar Act was an import tax, as will be the Townshend Acts, but the Stamp Act, an internal tax, okay? So which means that Parliament has come in and said that the colonists are going to pay this tax directly. And so, you know, there are some things, if you think about this, like, you know, yourself and your parents, there are some things that, you know, your parents make you do, and you may not like it, but you don't dispute your parents' power to do it, okay? So there are some things that if you've got a curfew, you might not like your curfew, but your parents have a right to give you a curfew. All right. Now, at the same time, there are things that your parent could ask you to do, and you would say, no, that's illegal. You know, like, you know, if your parent's like, okay, we're going to go rob a bank, you know, your parent cannot ask you to break the law. That is not part of their mandate. So the Stamp Act, what's happening here is that colonists didn't like the Sugar Act, but they didn't say, oh, Parliament can't do import taxes, but Parliament can't do direct taxes. Okay, that is what they have a problem with. So it's the internal nature of this tax on, you know, certain products that are, you know, kind of like a sales tax. And so, you know, this even is remembered even in Eazy-E's first album. They have got the stamp there. Okay, so this Stamp Act is kind of this symbol, like in the history of the United States. Like even in the 1980s, when Eazy-E is coming on the scene here with NWA, you see that they've got this thing here, which this was at the time when the government was first creating these explicit lyrics markers on albums, really targeting partially, targeting heavy metal and gangster rap. But you see here that they are protesting what they see as government tyranny. And so this gets the colonists really going, and they're chanting things like no taxation without representation. So they feel like that this tax has been unjustly put on them. And so the taxing authority, now this is one thing that we need to be very, very careful about, is what we say about taxing authority, because there are some people who are under the false impression that, that colonists wanted to be represented in Parliament. And that's not what colonists want. What they want is they want to have, they want to be represented by their legislatures. Okay, they want Parliament to allow their legislatures, their colonial assemblies, to get, to make their taxation policy. They say that Parliament doesn't have a right to tax them. And so just remember that the colonists do not want to be represented in Parliament. That is not their goal. They don't believe that taxing authority is there. Parliament doesn't have the authority to tax them. Only their colonial legislatures, in their mind, have their authority to tax them, because those are their representatives. And that goes back to this English tradition of taxation by consent and taxation with representation, and the consent of the governed, going back to the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. So there are some groups that are founded here, such as the Sons of Liberty. Now, the Sons of Liberty, this is a resistance movement, okay? They're using intimidation and mass protest in order to get their point across. So even though we see these people as, as heroes, they really were kind of a lawless bunch, when it's really all said and done. But this was a movement of people who were determined to resist these efforts at taxation. And so they would use intimidation and mass protest. Now, a lot of times, we like to talk about the boycotts and the protests, but there's also stuff like this cartoon here. You can kind of see, if you zoom in, like, notice that there is a noose here. Notice that this guy's been tarred and feathered, and he's got this hot tea being poured down his throat. This guy's being tortured by some really lawless types. This guy's holding a stick here. And so as far as that goes, the Sons of Liberty, wasn't like necessarily the most respectable bunch of people who have ever gotten together in U.S. history. But because they're on our side, we tend to say, okay, well, that's fine and good that you're doing all these things that are probably not great things to do. Now, the Daughters of Liberty were making homespun fabric. And this homespun fabric, it's kind of like today, like when people go to the thrift store, like, even though they can afford to buy new clothes, but they're like, I want to go to the thrift store because, it's cool to do that. And it becomes cool, really, to wear homespun cloth. Now, this goes back to, remember the whole thing about mercantilism and the role of a colony, that the colony is supposed to produce raw materials and send them over to the mother country, where the mother country manufactures finished goods and sends those back to the colonies to consume. So the economy of the mother country and the colony were very much intertwined, because if colonists weren't buying British goods, then then the whole back and forth is not working. So this was a way for people to not have to buy British goods. And this is what's going to lead to the repeal of the Stamp Act, really. Now, of course, there is some intimidation and stuff like that. You've got this one announcement here that the collector of tax stamps is going to resign publicly. And so as we look at that, there is a little mock funeral for the Stamp Act. And so the Stamp Act's repealed. Now, Parliament decides that they're going to pass the Townshend Acts. Now, once again, the Stamp Act is going to be, another, that's going to be the biggest thing, but another tax on imports with the Townshend Acts. And so these guys, again, all right, the Sons of Liberty are on the scene again, and we see here British troops landing in Boston because they're answering to this protest that we see happening because of this protest we see happening because of the Townshend Acts. And this is going to lead to the Boston Massacre, 1770. So remember, 1760s, you're looking at the Sugar Act, of course, the proclamation of 1763, but the three taxes, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts. So as far as this goes, let's take a look here. Okay, let's see, to the call. All right, so the Declaration of Independence. All right, so let's think about a few things here. What are some of these events? Let's see, Luke, LED is what you're looking for there. LED. You want to make sure that you got that. Now, as far as creating an American national identity, so you start to see here, which this is definitely something that's worth discussing. That during this time, this period from 1763 to 1776, this starts off as a protest. All right, starts off as a protest. So throughout the 1760s and the early 1770s, these people, they see themselves as British. Now, of course, the protest over the Stamp Act, you start to see that there is this measure of pride in wearing this homespun cloth. And so you see the development of this identity that is separate from being British, that you see the colonists are starting to see themselves as against the British. And so they're also rallying against these British troops. So when we look at the Boston Massacre, and this is basically a rowdy mob in Boston versus British soldiers. And Paul Revere was a member of the Sons of Liberty. He was a noted silversmith, a member of the Sons of Liberty. Now, this is showing, when you look here, that you see Paul Revere's depiction of what he calls the Boston Massacre, which, generally from an objective standpoint, we know that soldiers, if they're being threatened, if they believe their lives are threatened, soldiers or police officers, have they have the ability to use force if force is about to be used on them in a way that could threaten their lives. But Paul Revere made this as a propaganda piece. Notice how he's got all of the soldiers just standing in line together, as if they're ready, as if they just marched there and fired. Butcher's Hall is what this is called. Now you've got a woman over there, you've got a dog. It just looks like an innocent enough group. Now the moon is all the way over here. So Paul Revere, it was at nighttime, but notice that here it looks like the day. And I tell you, some memes never die, right? Just a quick moment to remember that Harambe is not going to be able to take this exam with us. Now, the verdict. So the soldiers are put on trial, and the verdict is not guilty. All right. So they're not guilty, and the Townshend Acts are eventually repealed. And so Parliament says, just because we don't tax doesn't mean we can't do it. So that's 1770. And I think that is an important kind of thing in the shaping of American identity, where you start to see these British troops as other. And so this is what starts. The reason I like the Boston Massacre as a divider is that with the Boston Massacre as a divider, you divide the taxes divide the taxes in the 1760s from these events in the 1770s. So as far as that goes, now Zoe, if you can help me out here, all right. So let me make sure when we're asking questions, and Jordan, yours is the same way. Let's make the questions about one thing. Because when somebody upvotes your question, I want to make sure that their upvote, feel free to ask multiple questions. So it's not like you're limited in the number of questions, but I see here where Zoe asks, can you explain the Battle of Saratoga, Continental Congress, Jay's Treaty, the first party system? If somebody upvotes that, I don't know what it is that they're upvoting. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that one, Zoe, and I'm going to let you ask a question that's just got one thing. And Jordan, I'm going to do the same thing with yours. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to note here just real quick, because you've got a quiz coming up, and I want to help you. I want to make that quiz fiveable, right? So, excuse me. And so Jay's treaty was a treaty in early national America. Now, what I would recommend, Jordan, I'd recommend you watch my video about George Washington's foreign policy. That's on YouTube. If you just look up George Washington's foreign policy, you should see my video where I go into the different foreign policy issues. Now, remember that Jefferson's faction they were Francophiles. They were pro-French. Hamilton's faction, Anglophiles, pro-British. And so John Jay was part of this British faction, this Federalist faction, this pro-British faction, and he was sent over to negotiate a treaty to get the British still had forts in our territory that they hadn't abandoned. Now, they were supposed to abandon them according to the Treaty of Paris, 1783. So John Jay went over there, and President Trump would have words for him today. How he likes to talk about treaties and talking about how that's a bad deal, it's a terrible deal, never been a worse deal made. Now, this was the sort of thing. He came back, and Britain had most favored nation status, most favored nation trading status, and in return, the British didn't agree to do anything that they hadn't already agreed to do. And so there were massive protests all across the country. The Senate ratified the Jay Treaty by a vote of 20-10, which was exactly how many votes they needed. If it had been one vote short, because treaties require 2/3 of the Senate, it would not have been ratified. So this was a very controversial treaty, and it was so because it was so favorable to the British, and it just didn't look like John Jay had really negotiated at all. All right, so as far as that goes, we're going into the now, Madeline, the Regulator Movement. Okay, we're talking about the Regulator Movement. That is kind of like Shays Rebellion, like regulators. Now, one thing that a lot of people get messed up when they read the Second Amendment, for example, a well-regulated militia. Now, we think about that today, and there are some people that say, well, this is a militia that's regulated by the government. Well, no. Regulation is government regulation that we think of this today, but regulation is also something that, when the military does what's called regulation and drill, that any kind of like marching or training. So when you've got the Minutemen, the folks that were in Shays Rebellion, these people are called regulators because they regulate. But when they regulate, they're going out and drilling. So these are people who, although they're not part of the military, they do military drill and they participate in regulation. Okay, so as far as that goes, the regulator movement, okay, is about basically it's kind of behind Shays Rebellion, but there were a lot of when you look at the Second Amendment, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. It's not talking about a well-regulated, like controlled militia, but a well-trained militia is what they're saying there. So these are people who've received this military training, and the people who are following Daniel Shays, they refer to themselves as regulators because they're participating in this regulation and drill. So we've got that. All right. So as far as that goes, all right, we'll get to John Locke and all of that kind of stuff in just a bit. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So the T Act, all right, kind of sets this thing back in motion. And the T Act, now I've got some of this stuff that's in my, that's in my lecture. So what you want to do here is the lecture, The Road to Revolution. And I go into that in a lot more detail. But Parliament granted a monopoly to the British East India Company, I believe, one of the India companies, but a British company, and said that they have the exclusive right to sell tea in the colonies. Now, they thought that they were doing the colonists a favor because the colonists, they thought they were doing the colonists a favor because it was good tea and they're selling it cheap. Now, the thing is, the colonists, though, remember when Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, one of the parts of that whole idea is the idea of economic freedom. So if I want to pay more for tea, and I want to even buy a tea that's not that good and I want to pay more for it, you know what? If that is part of my pursuit of happiness, I should be able to do that. And so as far as that goes, this is the sort of thing that the colonists are upset, not because it was a high tax, not because the tea was expensive, but because they were denied a choice. They were denied economic freedom. So that's when the Sons of Liberty come in, and there's the Boston Tea Party. Now, the Boston Tea Party, I mean, from what I've heard, like $90,000 worth of tea dumped into the harbor. This was an act of vandalism. Let's not sugarcoat it too much. And so the British responded with the Intolable Acts, which created an atmosphere of martial law in the colonies. Okay. And that is military rule. So this is not, you don't have anymore the colonial assemblies. The assemblies are sent home, or at least the Massachusetts Assembly is sent home, and martial law takes over. And so the military governor has full sway over the colony. Now, when we were talking about earlier, when we're talking about earlier, the Articles of Confederation, why did they want the Articles of Confederation to be so weak? Well, the reason they wanted the Articles of Confederation to be so weak is because they didn't want to go back to this. And so what this did is it closed the Boston port. It put the Massachusetts government in the hands of the royal governor. It said that that the quartering of soldiers was going to be even more directed by the British, to where they didn't even need permission to select a building. And then any British officials are going to be sent back home for trial if they're accused of anything in the colonies, which was kind of a slap in the face to the jury in Massachusetts that gave the Boston Massacre guys a not guilty verdict. And so this is what, speaking of regulators and regulation and drill, the Minuteman there. Okay, so this is the guy that he may be, he's most likely a farmer. He might be a blacksmith, or, the town apothecary, or the barber, but, a teacher. They are out there drilling. And really in Western Massachusetts, this had its root in, basically the towns were expected to provide for their own defense against Indian attacks and the like. But they start reviving this with in mind that they're going to shoot at the British. Now there's the Minuteman statue that we see there with the guy. He's got his gun and he's got his plow that he's putting aside there, showing that he's a farmer. And so that's leading to the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, of course, it's not until 15 months later that we see the Declaration of Independence, and Thomas Paine in 1776 is like, hey, what's going on here, everybody? All right, so as far as that goes, let's see. So, Katie, you're asking about the battles of Yorktown and Saratoga. Now, the Battle of Yorktown, of course, is the last battle in the American Revolution. Now, that is really, we pinned the British down, and they couldn't escape because of the French fleet. The French fleet was in the Chesapeake Bay. So, the Battle of the Chesapeake, the French fleet holds their own against the British, and Cornwallis is unable to get out. So, now, note, one of the biggest thing about Yorktown and Saratoga is that we couldn't have done what we did without the help of the French. It would have been next to impossible for the colonists to defeat the British the way that they did without French help. Now, how did they get the French help? The Battle of Saratoga. And so the Battle of Saratoga was the first time that a Continental Army force had defeated a large British army and forced their surrender. That was General Burgoyne's plan. Didn't go so well. And so that led to the French agreeing to give us military and financial backing. So the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 is often seen as the turning point of the American Revolution, because that's when the French help comes in. Now, remember that during Washington's administration, the French are going to come back and say, hey, aren't you going to help us? Because, we helped you back in the day. So that's the significance of Saratoga as a turning point. The Battle of Yorktown, of course, is with French help, we were able to, defeat the British. And so as far as that goes, the Declaration of Independence. Jordan, the Declaration of Independence, one thing to note here is that Jefferson is not writing this from scratch, and he's not really making an intentional effort to be overly original, okay? So this isn't supposed to be overly original. He's very consciously drawing on John Locke. So, if you think about turnitin.com and that sort of thing, he's, that would show up all kinds of red. And what Jefferson says here is he reiterates John Locke's philosophy of natural rights, life, liberty, and of course, John Locke said life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson saying life, liberty, excuse me, and the pursuit of happiness, which kind of expands this idea, because property makes me happy, but also not just property, but, you know, I'm a school teacher because I chose to be. You know, I have a right to choose my career. I have a right to attend a university that I'm qualified for admission into, you know, if I earn it. So I have the right to direct my own life. Okay, so that's the idea there. Now, also, he is invoking Locke's idea of the right of revolution, that when, you know, that basically the social contract, government exists to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government does not protect these things, that government becomes illegitimate, and the people can alter or abolish that government. So as far as that goes, that is really knowing about the Declaration of Independence, that it was influenced by Locke, you know, with natural rights and the right of revolution especially. And it's also been very influential and has been quoted and paraphrased in a number of other rebellious documents ever since. Why was Washington chosen to lead the American colonies in the American Revolution? Now, proper use of lead there. I like that. He's chosen to lead. All right. So as far as that goes, Washington is really, you know, it's kind of funny because Washington showed up at the Second Continental Congress. It was said wearing a military uniform. Now, he had military experience, but he didn't have good military experience. All right. Let's remember like the debacle at Fort Necessity and, you know, what he did there with Braddock's expedition. Washington's military experience was really not very successful. All right. But the thing is that all of the drama was going on in Massachusetts. And so they wanted the Second Continental Congress wanted to create a continental army. Now, John Hancock thought that he was the best person to lead this army, but John Hancock was from Massachusetts. What better way to show solidarity in the colonies? Because there were certainly people who thought, you know, those people in Massachusetts deserve it. They're a bunch of rabble rousers. They destroyed a bunch of tea. But what happens here is if you pick George Washington to go up there and command this army, then what you're seeing here is that it is truly continental, that it is a Virginian that is commanding this army. So the other thing is Washington certainly looked the part. I mean, he was I think about 6'2", if I'm not mistaken, at a time when, you know, the average person was probably about 2 inches, you know, the average man was probably closer to like 5'6", 5'7", something like that. And so that's something that, you know, needs to be taken into account, that he looked the part. He was from the South, which I think was the most important thing there. And of course, he did have some military experience, but it wasn't necessarily good military experience. All right. So as far as that goes, there we are. Now, Katie will, you know, leave off with a little bit of Hamilton, the report on manufactures. Okay. So Hamilton, remember that when we get into Jefferson versus Hamilton, then we see here that Jefferson is the laissez-faire guy. Let it be. And we're a nation of farmers, right? So we're a nation of farmers. We want to promote agriculture, and agriculture was already well entrenched, as we see going back to the colonies. It's a big deal there. And, you know, so it's going back to be entrenched there. And manufacturing, that was done, remember, under the colonies, that was done in the mother country. And so basically Jefferson was okay with it as long as we were doing it freely. Jefferson thought, you know what, that's good that we grow crops here and they get that we buy manufactured goods from Europe, because Jefferson had been to Europe and Jefferson's like, it's dirty, it's filthy. Jefferson wrote in his notes on the state of Virginia that his ideal for America is no manufacturing because farmers are more independent. So Hamilton comes along and he says the government needs to actually do some things to promote manufacturing. And so as far as that goes, Hamilton is saying that we need to do things. Now, the report on manufactures was the least successful because there wasn't a whole ton of support there. And he wanted subsidies for manufacturing that the government actively promote through cash subsidies. And it never got to that point. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just want to, let's see, let me go ahead and just show you something real quick because I'm going to be putting out new videos on my channel, okay, this year, and I'm hoping to do plenty of that kind of stuff there. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let me show you. Fiveable has a YouTube channel, and I'm going to go ahead and put this up there. Fiveable has a YouTube channel, and it's got an APUS history playlist. All right, so as far as that goes, now one of those videos is deleted because I had to re-upload it, so we're going to go ahead and take that out of the playlist. I've got an overview of APUSH, how to survive APUSH, and then a 13 colonies review. Okay, so I just put this up last night. You definitely want to subscribe to Fiveable's YouTube channel. Fiveable's almost got 1,000 subscribers, so almost getting there. We're getting there. So as far as that goes, let's see. So about Fiveable has currently how many? I thought subscribers. Where? What? Come on. Oh, 967. It was up there the whole time. So only looking for about 33 to get to 1,000. So getting there, and there's going to be a lot of good stuff there. Now, remember also that these reviews are going to be here for the time being. They're going to be free, but at a certain point, they're going to be things that are available to subscribers and not so much to the to the general population. So just keep that in mind. And Fiveable's got all kinds of stuff. Now there's always going to be free stuff, so you want to follow Fiveable and make sure that you subscribe to that YouTube channel. Now, what are y'all thinking for next week? We focused on the American Revolution, so I think probably next week we'll look at early national America. We'll go from, anywhere. I think that we can just kind of say anything sort of in play between the Articles of Confederation and, the Washington administration and Hamilton, Jefferson, all of that kind of stuff. Does that sound good? Now, the Jeffersonian era is probably getting, if we've got people this week that are more, that are focused on the American Revolution, then I think that we're probably not going to be there next week. Now, that doesn't mean I can't take some questions. Now, are y'all in the same class, Katie and Zoe? But y'all go ahead and speak up, because remember, the people that speak up to, okay. So the thing is, y'all are a bit ahead of where other people are right now. Are y'all taking this on a semester or something like that? Because y'all are moving really, really fast. So I'm kind of curious about that, whether y'all are taking this class on a semester, because y'all are just flying through it. A whole year. Now, did y'all start maybe earlier, early to mid-August? I'm guessing y'all been in school for a little while. Yeah, because y'all are going fast. Now, I will, just like I did tonight, I will I'll answer questions coming from other things. So we'll make sure, as far as that goes, that we got that. Okay, but I think next week we're going to be focusing on the Constitution. Okay, so we'll focus on, and that can go anywhere from the Articles to the Constitutional Convention or ratification to even the disputes between Jefferson and Hamilton when it comes to the Constitution. So we will focus on the Constitution next week. And thank y'all so much. And remember to subscribe. Remember to subscribe to, let's see, not taking the test. Wait, what test until March? All right, so yeah, we're going to be focusing on the Constitution, but I can go some other directions if we have people that want to do that. But it looks like that 70% of people here are currently studying the American Revolution. So we're going to focus on the Constitution. You're not going to take the AP test till May. You're not going to take that in March. I don't know who told you that, but yeah, that's going to be in May. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. And again, Fiveable's YouTube channel, good decision, because I'm going to be posting review videos on that channel. Remember, everyone, this year is Fiveable.